We'll go to the Boardwalk Honda hotline now. Frank Klose, of course, his Phillies Mailbag is open for business. But before we get to the Phillies Mailbag, a lot of chatter about one Manny Machado, Frank, as we get to the month of mid-June here. You start to hear those trade names popping up. So what do you know about Machado?
Well, it sounds like from everything that's out there that the Phillies really do like Manny Machado, and I think they plan to throw the bank at him this offseason to see if they can get him to be a long-term member of the Philadelphia Phillies. But from everything that's out there, it seems like the Phillies aren't really willing to go berserk at the trade deadline, though. Give up a lot of these prospects that they've been saving up over the years just to get him for 2 months. I think they recognize that they have a tremendous amount of financial power in the marketplace next offseason. And, regardless of whether or not they give prospects, that financial strength is still going to be there. And, if you look at a lot of the other teams that are interested in Machado, according to reports like the Chicago Cubs, when you look at the Cubs and their payroll commitments, they might not really be suitors long term. So it seems like the Phillies have a good position next offseason, and they don't really see the need to give up a lot of prospects now for 2 months, especially since, as we've seen lately, the Phillies are kind of a little bit less than top contenders at the moment.
Yeah, Frank, one thing is for sure. The interesting thing is this shortstop third base situation. And you got Kingery playing short. You got J.B. Crawford now kind of playing third. And you got Maikel Franco kind of out of the rotation here. So what would they view Machado as, and what do they view Kingery as, and what do they view J.P. Crawford as is really, I think, an interesting question here if they were to get a guy like Machado.
Well, I think when that happens, that everything else will kind of follow suit after that. So if they add a Machado, I tend to think that he's going to be a shortstop at first. He's doing a decent job at the position. I think when he signs with the team as a free agent, he wants to sign as a shortstop. And let's face it, you can't say that you're not going to sign Manny Machado because you have Scott Kingery or J.P. Crawford at this point, right? You want to get the best players in the door that you possibly can, and then you figure out the rest after that.
What is going to happen with Franco? I mean, has he just essentially become a bench player at this point?
As I wrote the other day on 97.3 ESPN.com, I think he's pretty much done. I think with what we're seeing now with the Phillies is that Franco's had his opportunities. He didn't take advantage of it, and they seem to be going forward, giving other people the opportunities at this point. And it's a real shame because I do believe that Franco has a good amount of talent, but even when he was having that nice stretch earlier in the year, what we said is, well, you know what? He has these stretches at times, but he's got to put it together for a season. You can't have your starting third baseman only be productive once in a while. So unfortunately for him, it sounds like he's kind of played himself out of the Phillies' future.
Frank Klose with us. Well, Frank, let's get into the mailbag. And a good question for Matt is he wants to know how many decent Phillies prospects are subjected to Rule 5 plucking. And if there's a good amount, he says, well, trade some of them to get Manny Machado.
Yes, the Phillies do have a good amount of prospects that will be eligible for the Rule 5 draft next offseason. Now, for somebody to qualify to be taken in the Rule 5 draft, they must have been with the organization 4 years or 5 years if they joined the organization before they turned 18. So the Phillies have a lot of guys kind of coming up, and if you look at the list, some of the names are pretty big. I think that Daniel De Los Santos, who they acquired for Freddie Galvis, he's having a tremendous season at AAA Lehigh Valley. Of course, he's going to be on there. Tom Eshelman, who's had a little bit of a rough year, still kind of promising. He'll certainly be on there. Adonis Medina, who's their number 2 prospect, he will certainly be on there. But I think you're kind of getting a little bit ahead of the conversation here if you're worrying about that now, because a lot could happen between now and then. And even though a player necessarily needs to be on the 40-man roster to risk being picked, doesn't mean that they're a good candidate to get picked. Or, I think we saw this year too, the Phillies lost Carlos Tocci to the Texas Rangers. And I think the thing with Tocci is the Phillies viewed him as somebody who very capably could play the outfield in the major leagues. Maybe some questions about his bat being ready. And the Rangers are sucking it up and taking him on the roster for the year, but he's batting under 100. He's batting just 0.80 for the Texas Rangers. So sometimes guys like that who you think do have some ability but aren't going to necessarily project to be starters or project to be star players, you might have to let some of those types of guys go to make sure that you have the promising prospects. But right now, the Phillies will keep the best of the best, and if they lose somebody who's a fringe major leaguer long term, it's not the end of the world. So I think you try to hang on to your prospects because those lower level guys aren't going to get you a Manny Machado anyway. The Orioles are going to go for the top prospects, which I think the Phillies, as I just said, would rather have.
Yeah, I saw you listed the name Sixto Sanchez. That turns a lot of heads. Although, didn't he just have a health issue down in Clearwater?
It sounds like it's a minor setback. I think they're just being cautious and kind of shutting him down for now. They don't sound like it's a serious issue, but those guys, as they go from level to level, especially in his case, going to Class A advanced for the first time, those are some longer seasons, and I think when anything little comes up, they might just want to give them a little bit of a break.
So how about if the Phillies don't trade for Manny Machado, who do they realistically get? Mike wants to know that.
Well, I think there's one name that I think is a really good match for the Phillies, and that's Mike Moustakas of the Kansas City Royals. In fact, I was actually kind of thinking the Phillies should consider him this past offseason when he hung out there for a while. But the reason why Moustakas kind of went unsigned was that he had a draft pick attached to him since he got a qualifying offer from the Royals. So what ended up happening for this year is the Royals, in order to try to get some value for Moustakas, they signed him to a very reasonable one-year deal for $6 million. He's a left-handed third baseman, and I think the fact that he can no longer be offered a qualifying offer at the end of the year makes him a little bit easier to acquire for a team like the Phillies, and it's not going to cost them a whole lot. I think the Kansas City Royals will be looking for some value in return. Maybe for a team like the Phillies, they do trade a prospect that's promising, and but maybe with that, a team like the Royals has the ability to be patient with Maikel Franco a little longer, or see if somebody like Franco can give them something long term. The Royals really don't have a long-term answer at third base right now. So to somebody like Franco, they have a year or two that they could give him to kind of see if they get anything out of him. And if you're the Royals in the situation they're in, they might want to roll the dice on somebody like Franco at this point because they went through that wonderful stretch. Eric Hosmer's moved on. Moustakas will be next probably, and they really need to get some new assets into the organization, and there might be a good match there. But I think a lot of teams interested in the third baseman might want somebody like him. So we'll have to see how the market kind of plays out because the people that are going to be in on Machado, maybe be in on Josh Donaldson. They might see Moustakas as a good plan C, but maybe that makes him a little bit more requirable for the Phillies.
That's at the third base position. You also wrote that maybe a left-handed starter.
Yeah, I think if the Phillies were going to be in the market, I think they're going to be active in the market. And we talked about Cole Hamels a little bit. He's got an option for next year. Somebody like Danny Duffy of the Royals, since as I just mentioned, the Royals are looking for some assets. If the Phillies can kind of solve their left-handed starter for next year during a trade now, they might have to consider that because, let's face it, if one of those two players gets moved at the trade deadline, for anybody, the Phillies might just want the guy for the following year. So they have to at least listen to see if maybe they can kind of solve that slot for next year now, even though they might not necessarily find themselves to be a strong contender for the postseason this year.
And you and Mike talked about Maikel Franco and his struggles and how they've sort of maybe are ready to move on from him. But Megan's asking, why are the Phillies using J.P. Crawford at third? Must be the team's top shortstop prospect and a strong defender there. Now, I thought it was interesting, Frank, that they moved J.P. Crawford to third not long after Jake Arrieta had his comments about not liking how the shift works.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that work here with this decision, and I think overall it's not a terrible decision. I think clearly J.P. Crawford is the superior shortstop when compared to Scott Kingery. If you're going to look at either of them at third base, I think Crawford's going to give you the stronger arm that you might need a little bit more at that position. Now, if Kingery in second base is very much occupied, I think what they want to do with Kingery is let him just stay at shortstop for a while, get his regular at-bats, know his name is going to be in the lineup at shortstop every single day. And then, with all the shifting that they are doing, somebody like J.P. Crawford, he's going to bring a lot of range to third base, too, that can kind of help up towards the middle in some of those shifts, in some of the situations where perhaps Kingery's range isn't as good to his right. So I think right now it's not the ideal situation, but what they kind of are thinking is that this is the most productive alignment that they could possibly use for the time being, and they're just going to roll with it for a while because, let's face it, Maikel Franco didn't give them any reason to put either of those players on the bench instead. So this will be what they do for now, and we'll see what happens in the offseason. If they add a Machado, they add a Moustakas, they add anybody else, then you'll kind of see where the pieces fall afterwards. Could Cesar Hernandez eventually be traded and Kingery end up at second base? Maybe they like the idea of Kingery kind of wandering around the entire field again as he was going to do this year. There's still a lot that needs to be decided, and I think for the Phillies, they're just going to get the best possible players in there, and then they'll worry about that later.
All right, you can always send Frank a tweet for the mailbag at Frank Klose. And, of course, every week at this time, we answer your Phillies mailbag questions here on the Sports Bash. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, gentlemen.